When I inherited my step-grandparents' $1.2 million estate, I quietly put it in a trust. Months later, my brother showed up with fake documents claiming he owned everything. "You're out by Friday," he grinned. I just smiled and said, "You really think I'd let that happen? What happened next destroyed their lives?" All right, Reddit, strap in because this is going to be one hell of a ride. I've been lurking on this sub for years, reading your stories and thinking, man, I wish I had something this good to share. Well, the universe finally delivered. And holy cow, did it deliver big time. This happened over the course of about 2 years, but the main action was concentrated in the last 8 months. I'm still processing everything that went down, and honestly, I need to get this off my chest. Fair warning, this is going to be extremely long, but I promise it's worth reading to the very end. The payoff is absolutely incredible. Names have been changed to protect the guilty, but everything else is 100% true. I've got documentation for most of it, screenshots, recordings, and my best friend was there for all the really good parts. This isn't some creative writing exercise. This actually happened to me. I, 34 male, live in Colorado, and pull in $85,000 managing shopping centers and office buildings. Nothing fancy, but I've got my F-150, decent apartment, and a killer home gym setup. I'm the responsible type. Always have been. My younger brother Blake? Complete opposite. This guy could charm a cop out of writing him a speeding ticket, then return your borrowed truck 3 days later with an empty gas tank and mysterious dents. He bounced between jobs like a pinball, insurance sales 1 month, starting his own business the next. Translation, asking mom for money that would mysteriously vanish. Despite being a walking disaster, Blake was always mom's golden child. After my parents' messy divorce when I was 12, Dad basically disappeared to Arizona. Mom had a very specific type. Guys with money willing to spend it on her sob stories about being a struggling single mother. When I was 16, she married Rick. And this guy was different. Rick owned 6 auto repair shops around Denver and had serious money. But he was genuinely good. He didn't try replacing my dad or fall for mom's manipulation. Maybe he even favored me a little. Probably because I wasn't constantly hitting him up for handouts like Blake. Rick taught me about investments and business while we watched Sunday football. He was the closest thing to a real father I'd ever had. When he died suddenly at 58 from a heart attack, it devastated all of us. Rick's parents lived in this incredible Cherry Hills Village mansion, one of those old money neighborhoods where houses start at $2 million. Beautiful red brick colonial with manicured yards, in-ground pool, and a garage bigger than most apartments. The house had been in Rick's family for 3 generations. After Rick died, his parents basically adopted me and Blake as their own grandchildren. But the favoritism was obvious from day one. While Blake partied every weekend and showed up maybe 3 times a year, Christmas for presents, Easter for dinner, and whenever he was broke, I was there every weekend without fail. I helped with computer problems, fixed broken stuff, took them grocery shopping, and just genuinely enjoyed their company. We'd sit by the pool while they told stories about how Rick's grandfather built the family business from nothing. Blake would charm them for a few hours, take Instagram photos at the fancy house, then disappear until his next financial emergency. Both grandparents were sharp as tacks in their 80s and definitely noticed the difference. They never said anything directly, but I could tell they appreciated having someone who actually cared about them as people. 2 years ago, both died within 6 months of each other. The will reading was absolutely unforgettable. So here's where my best friend Danny becomes a crucial part of this story. Danny's been my buddy since college. We pledged the same fraternity, roomed together junior year, and he's basically become the brother I wish I'd had instead of Blake. He's a paralegal at one of the biggest law firms in downtown Denver, and he's got this incredibly dry sense of humor that makes even the worst situations somehow bearable. When I told him about the will reading, he immediately insisted on coming with me for what he called moral support and premium entertainment. The law office was one of those intimidating places with marble floors, expensive oil paintings, and furniture that probably cost more than I make in 6 months. Mom showed up wearing a brand new designer dress that I'm pretty sure cost more than my monthly rent, complete with matching shoes and a purse that still had the price tag tucked inside. Blake rolled up in a BMW M3 that he claimed he was test driving for a friend, but was obviously borrowed from somebody who had better credit than he did. The elderly lawyer, who looked like he'd been handling wills since the Civil War, started reading through the document in that formal, monotone voice that lawyers use. There was some small stuff first: $10,000 to their church, $5,000 to their longtime housekeeper Maria, various personal items to family, friends, and distant relatives. Then he got to the main event, and the room went completely silent. To my step-grandson Blake Thompson, I leave my complete coin collection, my golf clubs, and the sum of $25,000 to be distributed from my savings account. Blake's face lit up like he'd just won the lottery. He was practically bouncing in his chair, and Mom was beaming with pride like her golden child had just graduated from Harvard. To my step-grandson Jake Thompson, I leave the remainder of my estate in its entirety, including the family home at 1247 Maple Ridge Drive, all investment portfolios, all remaining savings accounts, the life insurance payout, and all business interests, totaling approximately $1.2 million. The silence in that room was absolutely deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Danny later told me he had to physically bite his tongue to keep from laughing out loud at the expressions on their faces, which apparently went from smug satisfaction to complete shock in about half a second. Blake was the first to speak, and his voice cracked like a teenager going through puberty. Wait, what? There has to be some kind of mistake here. That can't be right. Mom's face went from shock to pure, undiluted rage in about 2 seconds flat. Her left eye started doing that twitching thing it does when she's about to lose it completely. This isn't right. This can't be legal. They were clearly confused or manipulated in their final years. Jake, you need to do the right thing here and share this properly. I just sat there, honestly as shocked as they were. I knew the grandparents liked me and appreciated everything I did for them. But $1.2 million? That's not just life-changing money. That's never worry about working again if you're smart about it. Money. That's buy a house with cash money. The lawyer continued reading, and this is where the grandparents showed just how smart they really were. They'd included detailed explanations for their choices, written in their own words. Basically, they'd been watching both of us for years and made their decision based on character, responsibility, maturity, and who actually cared about them as people, rather than just seeing them as walking ATM machines. The letter specifically mentioned how I'd been there for them consistently, how I'd helped with everything from computer problems to doctor appointments, how I'd spent time with them just talking and being family. It also mentioned, in very diplomatic language, that Blake had only visited when he needed money, and had shown little interest in actually building a relationship with them. Danny whispered to me, "Dude, your mom looks like she's about to spontaneously combust." He wasn't wrong. Mom was doing that thing where she gets really quiet and her left eye starts twitching rapidly. That's never a good sign with her. It usually means she's planning something devious. As we left the office, Blake immediately pulled me aside in the parking lot. "Hey man, you know this is completely messed up, right? This isn't fair at all. We should definitely split this money. We're brothers, and brothers stick together." I told him I needed time to process everything and think about the situation. But I could see the wheels turning in his head, and I could definitely see the gears spinning in Mom's head too. They were already planning something, and I knew it wasn't going to be good. That evening, Danny and I went to our usual sports bar to talk everything over. We ordered some wings and sodas, found a quiet booth in the back, and Danny got serious. "Jake, you know they're going to come for you hard, right? This is way too much money for them to just accept and walk away. Your mom's probably already researching ways to contest the will, and your brother's probably calculating how much debt he can pay off with half of $1.2 million. He was absolutely right, and I knew it. I'd grown up with these people for over 30 years. I knew exactly how they operated when money was involved, and I knew they weren't going to just accept this decision gracefully. So what do? How do I protect myself? Danny grinned and pulled out his phone. We get ahead of them. I know some really good people at the firm who specialize in estate planning and asset protection. Let's make sure your situation is completely bulletproof before they even figure out what they want to try. The next few months were incredibly strange and tense. Mom would call me every few days and make these passive-aggressive comments about family obligations and how blood should be thicker than water. She'd hint around about how the grandparents probably didn't really understand what they were doing, and how it would be the Christian thing to do to share the inheritance more equally, according to the terms that we carefully established. Think of it like putting your money in an unbreakable bank vault, she explained. They can't steal what they can't legally access, and they can't challenge what they can't prove exists in your name. We also did something else that turned out to be absolutely crucial later. We hired a professional property management company to handle the house. They installed a state-of-the-art security system, arranged for regular maintenance and upkeep, and documented everything that happened on the property. The house was worth about $750,000 on its own, so we weren't taking any chances with someone trying to break in or damage it. Danny found this whole situation absolutely hilarious. Dude, you're playing 4D chess while they're playing checkers with half the pieces missing and no understanding of the rules. Meanwhile, Blake was getting more and more desperate as time went on. He'd started a landscaping business with some money he'd borrowed from Mom, but it was failing spectacularly. He didn't know anything about running a business, he was terrible with customers, and he kept spending the money on personal stuff instead of business equipment. Mom had been dating this guy Craig for about 6 months, but it turned out he was married with 3 kids and had been lying to her about everything. Her whole world was falling apart piece by piece, and she was looking at my inheritance like it was her personal salvation and the solution to all her problems. The breaking point came about 4 months after the will reading. Blake showed up at my apartment at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night, obviously agitated and rambling about how unfair everything was, and how he couldn't sleep because he was so stressed about money. "You don't even need all that money," he said, pacing around my living room like a caged animal. "You've got your job, you've got your apartment, you've got your whole life already set up perfectly. I've got nothing, man. Absolutely nothing. My business is failing. I'm behind on everything, and I don't know what I'm going to do." I told him that wasn't my problem, and that I hadn't asked for any of this to happen. I reminded him that the grandparents had made their decision based on years of watching both of us, and maybe if he'd spent more time with them instead of just showing up when he needed money, things might have been different. That's when he got really nasty and showed his true colors. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you? You think you deserve this more than I do just because you're boring and responsible? Well, this isn't over, Jake. Not by a long shot. Family is family, and I'm going to make sure you do the right thing here." The threatening tone in his voice was unmistakable, and I knew right then that the gloves were coming off. I called Danny immediately after Blake left, even though it was almost midnight. "It's happening," I said. "They're done being subtle about it. Time to lawyer up hard and get ready for war," Danny replied. 2 weeks later, I was at the house doing some routine maintenance work, checking on the heating system, testing the security cameras, making sure the pool equipment was working properly. It was a beautiful Saturday morning in early spring, and I was in the garage organizing some tools when I heard the sound of multiple cars pulling up the long driveway. I looked out the window and saw Mom's silver sedan, followed by Blake in that borrowed BMW, and behind them was a third car I didn't recognize. Some guy in a cheap gray suit carrying a briefcase, and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Danny had been with me that morning, helping me install some additional security cameras around the property perimeter. When he saw the cars pulling up, he got this huge grin on his face like Christmas morning had come early. "Showtime, brother. You ready for this performance?" I was as ready as I'd ever be for whatever they were planning to throw at me. They marched up to the front door like they owned the place, moving in formation like some kind of dysfunctional military unit. Mom was wearing yet another brand new outfit that she obviously couldn't afford, and Blake had this incredibly smug expression on his face that made me want to slap it right off. The guy in the cheap suit turned out to be some bottom-tier lawyer who looked like he'd gotten his degree from a correspondence course. The kind of guy who runs late-night TV commercials about personal injury claims and probably works out of a strip mall office next to a nail salon. "Jake," Mom said, not even bothering with basic pleasantries like hello or how are you. "We need to talk right now. This whole inheritance situation has gotten completely out of hand and needs to be resolved immediately." The lawyer stepped forward and cleared his throat importantly. "Mr. Thompson, I represent your mother and brother in this matter. We've discovered some very serious irregularities in the will that need to be addressed immediately through proper legal channels." I just stared at them calmly. Danny was standing behind me, trying not to laugh out loud at the absurdity of the situation. "What kind of irregularities are we talking about?" I asked in the most neutral tone I could manage. Blake pulled out some official-looking papers that were obviously fake. "We had the will examined by a handwriting expert who specializes in estate fraud. Turns out the signatures were forged by someone who wanted to cheat us out of our rightful inheritance. The real will left everything to be split equally between both of us, just like it should be." The absolute audacity of this guy was breathtaking. He was standing there on my front porch with obviously fake documents, trying to con me out of my inheritance with a completely straight face, like he actually believed I was stupid enough to fall for this. "That's very interesting," I said calmly, because I had the will authenticated by 3 different handwriting experts right after it was read, plus 2 additional legal experts who specialize in estate fraud. All 5 of them confirmed it was completely legitimate and legally binding. The lawyer cleared his throat nervously and adjusted his tie. "Nevertheless, we're fully prepared to take this matter to court and fight for what's rightfully ours. However, we'd prefer to settle this matter amicably and avoid the expense and publicity of a lengthy legal battle. We're willing to accept a 50-50 split of all assets, which is more than fair considering the circumstances. Mom nodded earnestly like she was doing me some kind of favor. It's only fair, Jake. Family should stick together through thick and thin. And this is what Rick's parents would have wanted if they'd been thinking clearly. That's when Danny stepped forward, and I could see he was absolutely loving every second of this ridiculous charade. Hi there. I'm a paralegal with the law firm that's been handling Mr. Thompson's estate matters. I think you should know that everything Mr. Thompson inherited has been placed in an irrevocable trust structure for asset protection purposes. Any legal claims against the estate would need to be filed against the trust entity, not against Mr. Thompson personally. The color drained from the lawyer's face like someone had opened a valve. Trust? What trust? Nobody mentioned anything about any trust during our research. I pulled out my phone and showed them the official documentation. The Jake Thompson Family Trust, established 4 months ago through proper legal channels. Everything's been transferred completely. The house, the savings accounts, the investment portfolios, the life insurance payout, all of it belongs to the trust now, not to me personally. Blake looked completely confused and lost. What the heck does that even mean? Can you explain it in normal English? Danny's grin got even wider. It means you can't touch any of it through normal legal channels. And if you try to file fraudulent claims against a legally established trust, that's a felony offense with serious jail time attached. The lawyer was already backing toward the door like the house was on fire. I think there's been a significant misunderstanding here. We'll need to research this further and we'll be in touch. He practically ran to his car, and I'm pretty sure he broke several traffic laws getting out of the neighborhood. But Mom and Blake weren't finished with their little performance. You think you're so smart, don't you? Mom said, her voice dripping with venom and barely contained rage. But I know you better than anyone, Jake. You're weak inside, and you've always been weak. You'll give in eventually because you can't handle conflict. Blake nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, we'll see how tough you are when the whole family knows what kind of selfish, greedy person you really are. We'll see how you like it when everyone knows the truth about how you manipulated 2 elderly people. That turned out to be the biggest mistake they could have possibly made. They weren't bluffing about the family situation at all. Within 1 week, I was getting phone calls and text messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunts, uncles, cousins from both sides of the family, all asking about the situation with the inheritance and whether the disturbing rumors they'd been hearing were actually true. Mom had launched what could only be described as a full-scale character assassination campaign against me. According to her carefully crafted version of events, I had systematically manipulated the grandparents during their final years when they were sick and mentally vulnerable. She claimed I had isolated them from the rest of the family, brainwashed them into changing their will, and essentially stolen money that rightfully belonged to the entire family. She was telling anyone who would listen that I was basically a master manipulator who had taken advantage of elderly people in their weakest moments. The story kept getting more elaborate and dramatic with each telling, and she was spreading it to everyone she could think of. But here's where having a paralegal for a best friend really paid off in a big way. My attorney didn't just practice estate law, she also handled defamation and libel cases. And Mom had made what turned out to be a critical error in her strategy. She had put her lies in writing in multiple places. She'd sent a detailed group email to about 20 family members, laying out her version of events in excruciating detail. The email was full of specific accusations about fraud, elder abuse, and financial manipulation that she couldn't possibly prove because they weren't true. She'd also posted similar stuff on social media and sent text messages to various people. This is absolutely pure gold, my attorney said when I showed her all the evidence. She's opened herself up to a massive defamation lawsuit that could bankrupt her. But even more importantly, she's created documented evidence of a conspiracy to defraud the trust through false accusations. Meanwhile, Blake was getting more aggressive and desperate by the day. He'd started showing up at my apartment complex uninvited, bothering my neighbors and asking inappropriate questions about my lifestyle and whether I seemed like the type of person who would steal from family members. He was basically trying to build some kind of case against my character. He even had the audacity to call my boss at work, trying to get me in trouble by claiming I was under investigation for financial crimes and elder abuse. He told my boss that I might be arrested soon and that the company should consider whether they wanted to keep employing someone like me. That turned out to be another massive mistake on his part. You see, my company has a legal department staffed with attorneys who don't mess around, and they really don't appreciate it when random people harass their employees with false accusations and threats. They sent Blake a cease and desist letter that basically told him to back off immediately or face serious legal consequences, including harassment charges. Danny was having the time of his life watching this whole situation unfold. Dude, they're completely destroying themselves with their own stupidity. You don't even have to do anything except sit back and watch them implode. But I was getting tired of constantly playing defense and waiting for their next move. It was time to stop reacting to their attacks and start going on the offensive to show them what real consequences looked like. Remember how I mentioned that Blake was running a landscaping business that was failing? Well, Danny and I decided to do some detailed research into his business practices, and what we discovered was absolutely incredible. Turns out Blake wasn't just bad at running a business. He was actively committing fraud on multiple levels. We found evidence that he'd been taking deposits from customers for landscaping jobs and then not completing the work. He'd been advertising services that he wasn't licensed to provide in Colorado. He'd been using unlicensed workers for jobs that required certified professionals. He'd been dumping yard waste in places where it wasn't allowed. And the cherry on top of this disaster sundae, he'd been completely dodging taxes for 3 years straight. "This is absolutely beautiful," Danny said, as we went through all the documentation we'd gathered. "Your brother's basically running a one-man crime spree disguised as a legitimate business." We carefully compiled everything we'd found and sent it to all the appropriate authorities. The IRS got a detailed report about the tax evasion. The state licensing board got documentation about the unlicensed work. The Better Business Bureau got copies of all the fraud complaints we could find. We even tracked down some of the clients he'd ripped off and connected them with my attorney's firm for potential civil lawsuits. But that was just the beginning of our counterattack strategy. Mom had been bragging all over social media about her legal battle to recover the family inheritance that had been stolen from her. She'd been posting photos of herself with lawyers, talking about how she was fighting for justice and protecting family values. She'd even started a crowdfunding campaign to pay for legal fees, claiming she was a victim of elder abuse and financial fraud who needed help getting justice. That crowdfunding campaign was another huge mistake, because it was outright fraud. She was asking people for money to fight a legal battle that she knew was completely bogus, and she was making false claims about being a victim of crimes that had never happened. My attorney filed formal complaints with the State Bar Association against the lawyer who'd helped them with the fake will. She also reported the crowdfunding campaign to the platform for fraud and misrepresentation, and she sent documentation to the state attorney general's office about the fake legal claims. "Your family's about to learn a very expensive lesson," my attorney told me during one of our meetings. "You don't mess around with estate trusts in Colorado, and you definitely don't mess around with my clients when I have this much evidence." The results were swift and brutal. Within 2 weeks, Blake's business license was suspended, pending a full investigation. The IRS had frozen his bank accounts due to the tax evasion. The state attorney general's office had opened an investigation into his business practices, and the lawyer who'd helped them was facing a disciplinary hearing that could permanently end his career. Mom's crowdfunding campaign was shut down completely, and she had to refund the $2,800 she'd managed to raise from sympathetic relatives who believed her lies. But the absolute best part of this whole thing? They had no idea that I was behind any of it. They thought it was all just incredibly bad luck and unfortunate coincidences that everything was falling apart at the same time. 6 months after their pathetic failed ambush at my house, my phone rang at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. It was Blake, and he sounded like he'd been crying for hours. "Jake, man, I really need your help. I'm in serious trouble here. Like, really, really serious trouble that I can't get out of by myself." Apparently, the IRS had hit him with a $52,000 tax bill that included penalties and interest dating back 3 years. His business was completely dead and buried, his credit was destroyed, and he was facing potential criminal charges from multiple fraud complaints that had been filed against him. He'd been evicted from his apartment for non-payment of rent and had been living out of his car for 2 weeks. "I know we've had our differences and said some things we didn't mean," he said, his voice shaking with desperation. "But you're my brother, and blood is thicker than water. I need to borrow some money, just until I can get back on my feet and figure out how to fix this mess." I almost started laughing at the irony. "How much money are we talking about here?" $50,000. "I know it's a lot, but I'll pay you back every single penny with interest. I swear on Mom's life I'll pay you back as soon as I can get my business running again." "Blake, you still owe me $500 from 2019 when you borrowed money for your car registration and promised to pay me back the next week. Come on, man. Please. I'm desperate here. I've got nowhere else to turn and no one else to ask. The bank won't even look at me. I hung up on him without saying another word. 2 days later, Mom called me, and she was crying so hard I could barely understand what she was saying. Jake, baby, I'm so sorry about everything that happened. I made a terrible mistake. I was grieving and confused and scared, and I let my emotions get the better of me. I should never have questioned the will or said those things about you. Turns out Craig, the married guy she'd been dating and planning a future with, had dumped her completely when his wife found out about the affair. She'd been evicted from her apartment for non-payment of rent and had been staying in cheap motels when she could afford it, or sleeping in her car when she couldn't. The legal bills from their failed inheritance grab had completely wiped out what little savings she had. I need help, honey, she said between sobs. I just need a place to stay until I can get back on my feet. Maybe a small loan to get a decent apartment and start over fresh. How much money are we talking about? I asked. $20,000. I know it's a lot of money, but I'm family. I'm the woman who raised you and sacrificed everything to make you the successful man you are today. Yeah, you raised me to be responsible with money and not trust people who try to manipulate me with guilt trips, which is exactly why I'm not giving you any money. She immediately started screaming at me, calling me ungrateful, selfish, cruel, and a disappointment to the family. Same old Linda, showing her true colors when she didn't get what she wanted. I hung up on her too. Danny was with me when I got both of those calls. He was recording everything on his phone for legal documentation purposes. Dude, this is better than any TV show I've ever watched, he said. Your family's completely imploded, and now they're literally begging you to save them from the consequences of their own actions. The final call in this pathetic trilogy came from their lawyer, who had been disciplined by the state bar and was facing his own serious financial problems as a direct result of getting involved in this case. Mr. Thompson, I want to sincerely apologize for my role in this entire matter. I was completely misled by your family about the facts of the case, and I made some very poor professional decisions that I deeply regret. I'm hoping we can work something out that benefits everyone involved. Work what out exactly? I asked. Well, I'm facing some significant financial hardship as a direct result of this case. I was hoping you might consider a small settlement to help me get back on my feet professionally. Nothing major, just enough to cover my immediate expenses and legal fees. The sheer audacity was absolutely breathtaking. This guy wanted me to pay him money for trying to help steal my inheritance with fake legal documents. Let me think about that proposal and get back to you, I said, and hung up immediately. A week later, I was having a quiet dinner at the house, my house, when the doorbell rang around 8 p.m. I checked the security camera monitor and saw Mom and Blake standing on the front porch, looking like they'd been living rough for weeks. Which, as it turned out, they had been. Jake, Mom said when I opened the door but kept the security screen locked. We need to talk. We're family, and family needs to stick together no matter what. Blake nodded eagerly like a desperate puppy. Look, I know I messed up big time. We both did. But we're desperate here, and we really need help. We'll do anything you want. I looked at them through the security screen mesh. They looked absolutely terrible. Dirty clothes, tired faces, completely broken down and defeated. It was almost sad, except for the fact that they'd brought this entirely on themselves. You're right, I said calmly. We are family, which is why what you did hurts so much more than if complete strangers had tried it. We're sorry, Mom said, and for the first time in years, she actually sounded like she meant it. We're really, truly sorry about everything. Please, just help us get back on our feet. We'll never ask you for anything again. I opened the door and let them into the living room, the same room where the grandparents used to watch their evening news programs and discuss their day. Here's what's going to happen, I said, in the calmest voice I could manage. I'm going to give you each a choice, and you need to decide right now. You can accept a one-time payment of $5,000 cash and sign a legal agreement to never contact me again for any reason whatsoever. Or you can leave right now with nothing, and we'll pretend this conversation never happened. Blake jumped at the offer immediately, like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. Yes, absolutely, yes. Thank you so much, Jake. You're literally saving my life here. Mom was harder to convince and tried to negotiate. $5,000? That's not nearly enough to get a decent apartment and get back on my feet properly. Maybe we could make it $10,000 each. $5,000 or nothing, I said firmly. Choose right now, or the offer disappears forever. She chose the money. I wrote them each a check from a specific account, made them sign a simple legal agreement that Danny had prepared beforehand, and watched them leave my property for what I knew would be the last time. Danny was waiting in the kitchen when I came back inside. So that's it? You're just going to give them money after everything they put you through? I smiled at my best friend. Danny, Those checks are drawn on a separate account that has exactly $10,000 in it, and nothing more. Once they cash them, that account will be completely empty and closed. And what's the significance of that? And they both just signed legally binding agreements, stating they accept this as full and final settlement of any claims against me or the trust. They can't ask for more money ever again. They can't contest the will again. They can't contact me for any reason whatsoever. And they can't make any more false accusations. If they violate the agreement, they have to pay me $50,000 each in damages. Danny's face broke into a huge grin. You magnificent genius. You bought your complete freedom for $10,000. Best money I ever spent in my entire life. 3 months later, I heard through the family grapevine that Blake had blown through his entire $5,000 in less than 2 weeks on nonsense and was back to living in his car. Mom had used her money to get a tiny studio apartment in a bad part of town, but she was already 2 months behind on rent and facing eviction again. They'd both tried calling me multiple times, but I'd blocked their numbers on everything. They'd tried showing up at the house twice, but the security company had them officially trespassed from the property with police involvement. I was finally, completely, utterly free from their drama and manipulation forever.